the webinar later with our community. So welcome everyone. So I'm Alison from Relief Applications, working as an interim COO. So I will do a quick presentation, quick introduction, sorry, from Johanna and Victoria. So thank you everyone for joining today. So we are really delighted to welcome two colleagues from Hala Systems. So Victoria was acting as a monitoring and evaluation manager, and Johanna as program manager. So Victoria's work really focuses on performance tracking, accountability, and generating insights that help improve the effectiveness of programs over time. And then we have Johanna with leading program management efforts with a focus on grants management and operational effectiveness across really complex projects. So drawing on their experience supporting programs in Syria and Ukraine, Victoria and Johanna will just share how operational crisis data can serve a dual purpose, really helping protect the beneficiaries, so the civilians, in real time, while also supporting longer-term accountability efforts. So they will basically discuss the types of data involved, what makes information legally actionable, and key lessons learned working in conflict-affected environments. So thank you for joining, and I will then now leave the floor to Victoria and Johanna. I will just share my screen to present the slides, and then we can start. Here we are. So Johanna and Victoria, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for your invitation to this webinar, and we are glad to be here today with you to talk about the work done by Hala. And I think Johanna, as Alison already introduced us, maybe like we can start directly. And Johanna will start actually.
Yes, let's do that. I do want to take a moment, just because I work with grant management. I feel like I want to take a second to thank the donors that funded Hala's work through governmental and supranational peace and stabilization grants. So we've gotten funding from donors like the German Federal Foreign Office, from the UK FCDO, Global Affairs Canada, and the EU, among many others. And what we'll do in this presentation is we'll start by briefly presenting Hala before turning to crisis data for early warning, and then turning to the accountability part of the work, as well as then two case studies of our work in Syria and Ukraine. Great, you can go to the next slide. So Hala's often quite complex work is guided by a question that is somewhat simple in itself, which is how can technology help protect people and strengthen accountability in the world's most challenging environments? So what Hala is a technological integrator and a tech consultancy for organizations working in crisis environments. We're high touch, meaning that our solutions are customized and they're AI and human driven, as opposed to relying completely on self-service or automation models. By doing this, we ensure that our solutions are well informed by user needs. We avoid implementation failures, and ultimately we're able to protect more people. So really what we do is we solve complex issues and problems that others cannot or will not solve. And we do this in collaboration with governments, NGOs, and international organizations alike since Hala was founded in 2015. And our operations are currently in Syria and Ukraine. Our vision is to increase security and justice for the world's most vulnerable populations. And our mission is to bring frontline expertise and practical solutions to organizations that protect people in the toughest places in the world. Okay, we can go to the next slide, please. So a few words about crisis data. So as many of you know very well, crisis data is often scattered, it's incomplete, it's not standardized, and this makes it easy. It makes it difficult to verify and also to be sure of how what conclusions we can draw from the data. So data fragmentation is really a big problem in many humanitarian and civilian protection settings. It's often sensitive, meaning it can directly or indirectly expose vulnerable communities and groups, such as children, for example, and also humanitarian operations themselves. So confidentiality is really a key in data collection and processing and storage. It's always important, but even more so when we're talking about data in crisis settings. So then the real question is really, how do we make sense of the data? How do we use it safely? And how do we verify it? And these are points that we're going to touch upon throughout this presentation. The amount of information available to organizations these days has really, we can be still on the previous one, please.
I'm sorry.
Thank you. That's fine. So the amount of data available has really grown exponentially over the last decade, and sources like satellite data are now more widely used. So it's important to recognize that information alone doesn't create accountability. Data matters when it can be cross-checked, verified, and preserved in a way that preserves its evidentiary value. So sometimes there's a misconception that information itself kind of leads to accountability, which is not the case. Okay, now we can move forward. So now we're going really to kind of the first piece of the puzzle, which is where Hala originates, and it's the civilian protection piece. So Hala was founded a decade ago with the goal of helping the White Helmets, also known as the Syria Civil Defense, to protect a large civilian population of the opposition-held northwest Syria. So this is an area that was targeted by indiscriminate airstrikes on civilians and civilian infrastructure, and the airstrikes were carried out by the Syrian armed forces and the Russian armed forces. So there were already informal warning systems in place, and plane spotters who were sharing their observations through walkie-talkies, and then there were manually activated sirens, but this was not a very reliable or efficient system, and that's where Hala came in and created the Sentry early warning system. And this system is reliant on spotters on the ground, and it's also reliant on AI algorithms. So what we did was to incorporate algorithmic threat predictions, multiple sources of input, and we diversified the type of warning channels available. So the system worked because it was it was launched in 2016, and then it was in use until December 2024 when al-Assad's regime fell. So the system worked by detecting threats using human observations, and we had we collected a total of 350,000 observations of aircraft movement over the course of these years that Sentry was active. It also relied on reports about recent airstrikes by partners that were media partners and local partners. This enabled us to detect patterns in the airstrikes, and it relied on audio data that we were able to intercept. So this is unencrypted radio communication between bomb plane pilots and command centers, and it was done over unencrypted radio channels, both in the case of Syrian armed forces and Russian armed forces, meaning that whoever had the right kind of commercially available device that could receive this audio was able to tap into the audio, and for obvious reasons this is important for warning purposes and later also accountability purposes. We then also analyzed with algorithms the trends, and with the algorithm help we were able to predict the immediate threats based on the patterns that the algorithm identified. So importantly, of course, comes the dissemination part. So the warnings were disseminated through several different channels to enable people to seek shelter. So this is, of course, the ultimate reason why we did this, is so people could protect themselves and take action, warn others, and seek shelter for themselves and their families. So the warning channels were visual warning systems. In essence, they're blinking lights accompanied by like an audio warning, sirens in densely populated areas. It was disseminated through social media such as Telegram and Facebook, and also FM radio warnings. The visual warning lights had a particular importance because they were installed in schools and hospitals, so very crucial civilian infrastructure. And there you can actually, in the first picture there, you can see some of the warning lights being tested. So the hardware was custom designed by Hala for this purpose, and we were assembling these kits to ship them over to Syria, where the white helmets then took over. And in the second picture, you see a white helmet technician who's installing these lights. And you see a red light and a yellow light. The yellow light means that an airplane is moving in the vicinity of the location, and the red light means that there's a reason to believe there's an imminent airstrike on the way. So people should seek shelter immediately when the red light were blinking. And like I mentioned, there was also an audio aspect to these warnings. So obviously, none of this made any difference unless people knew about the system. That's why the white helmets placed a lot of effort on raising awareness about the system. And this was done through the women's centers run by the white helmets. And they did an amazing job. They organized over 500 awareness raising sessions, reaching over 70,000 people, the majority of them women, who were then able to go into their communities and spread the word forward, and let people know about the possibility to subscribe to this warning over social media, and also to share information of what to do when an alarm is sounded. And the picture here that we see is from one of the smaller sessions with only a few women. This was in a more remote area. So lastly, to use kind of a cliche, we're always pleased if we can make ourselves redundant. So this is an approach that we implement across programs, and this is why we actually handed over the hardware and the management of the Sentry system to white helmets. We believe our mission is so important that it doesn't make sense for us to hold on to a system if there's a local actor that can take over it and make use of it. So the localization is really an important aspect in our work. Okay, let's move over to the next slide, which has some key figures related to the impact of the Sentry system. Sentry protected an area with 2.5 million residents, and it provided them with up to 8 minutes of life-saving warning time and time to prepare for the strikes. And the number of beneficiaries reached through the awareness raising session was 70,000, like I already mentioned. And we also asked the users of the Sentry Telegram channel what their experiences of using Sentry and receiving these warnings were. 75% of respondents reported that they had their own life or the life of somebody they knew saved by Sentry. And 86% reported they take measures when they get a warning, and 75% said they feel less worried because they have access to these warnings. So it's always important for us to hear directly from the end users and the beneficiaries when it's possible. And now we can go to the next slide. I want to share a testimony that involves a chemical attack and a fatal injury. So because this is quite heavy content, I do want to mention that if you're not feeling up to taking part of this kind of content today, you can turn off your audio for about 50 seconds, which is the time it'll take me to read this, and then you can come back to us. So this is a testimony by a man we call Mustafa from 2022, and he tells the following story. I used to work in a hospital in Hama. One day, a warplane and a helicopter approached. The hospital's visual warning system red light went off, and we immediately went down to the basement. Unfortunately, it was a double strike with a cluster bomb and chlorine gas. One of the doctors, may God have mercy on him, was not aware of the location of the emergency exits, and he passed away because of inhaling the chlorine gas. We were unable to evacuate one of the patients, but he survived because he was on a ventilator and did not inhale the gas. Everyone who went down to the basement survived. Chemical attacks in many ways are the most heinous types of attacks. And in Syria, the number of chemical attacks reportedly carried out by the regime against their own citizens is about 300. Hala has documented several of these attacks through the Sentry system, such as attacks on Khan Sheikhoun and Douma in 2017 and 2018. And we also contributed to an in-depth investigation by the Global Public Policy Institute about the use of chemical weapons, and we contributed with flight logs, satellite analysis, and OSINT data. And Victoria, if I could ask you to drop the link to that report in the chat, then people can take part of that if you want to dive deeper into this topic. Thank you. So this takes us to the next section, and we can, yeah, thank you. So as we collected data for warning Syrian civilians, we also realized that this data would be interesting to accountability organizations and institutions working on crimes, justice for crimes against international humanitarian law. And actually some of the first external requests for our data that we received were related to chemical attacks. We then also started publishing what we call supplemental reports whenever major attacks of any type would happen that fulfilled a certain type of criteria. And we started routinely sharing this with accountability partners that used them as part of their investigations. And in total, we ended up publishing over 170 of this type of reports for Syria. They are only a few of the total number of reports we issued, but the supplemental reports were issued whenever there was like significant loss of life and or critical civilian infrastructure and livelihoods. And as we started sharing the data with our first partners, the word quickly traveled that we had this data, and more organizations started to come to us. Among the first partners we had were Syrian Archive that work as part of Mnemonic, some UN bodies, and also Bellingcat, in addition to the White Helmet's own accountability and an investigation team. I want to mention that this work would not have been possible without a dedicated in-house legal team led by Hala's accountability lead, Ashley Jordana, who is an international lawyer with large networks and of course, extraordinary legal knowledge in her team. So to date, we've responded to 279 requests for information from 45 different organizations, and it includes also prosecutors and international bodies. And this applies to all of our areas of operation. We also provide other type of support in the shape of other analytical tools, legal guidance and training to partners, and evidence integration. And the data sources we've used to reply to requests for information include airstrike reports and supplemental reports. The total number of airstrike reports is more than 12,000, which of course reflects the large number of airstrikes that have happened. It includes also the flight observations, the 350,000 observations that I mentioned before, satellite imagery analysis, OSINT data, which is open source intelligence. It includes mobility data and the Air Force's audio communications that I touched upon earlier. And while this work is absolutely necessary, it can also be quite frustrating at times because the accountability process typically take very long years, sometimes decades. We also don't have control over how the evidence is used, how cases advanced, or how the institutions respond. And oftentimes we don't even know whether our data has been used. So what we can control is the quality and integrity of our data. And this is something that we take very seriously at Hala. And I want to speak briefly to that in the next slide before turning it over to Victoria. So how do we ensure that our data can serve as evidence? and how do we share this knowledge with others? So in order to be admissible in courts, evidence obviously needs to meet a set of requirements. For example, it has to be proven that it's not been tampered with, that it's authentic, it's uncontaminated. So this relates to a chain of custody, which is a legal term for the chronological documented record of every human that has interacted with a type of data and evidence throughout its lifetime. So managing this requires quite a bit of methodological and technical expertise, which can be challenging if the organization doesn't have a legal team, or if the legal team is very small or has less experience. So when Hala internally researched these requirements and created our own processes for our own data life cycles, this is when we decided to also share this information with others. And sometimes we share it publicly, like for example, in the case of the Hala protocol for the collection, preservation, and transfer of audio data. This is a best practice guidance for civilian society actors that want to use audio data for accountability. Audio is, thanks, Victoria. Audio is a powerful type of evidence in that it can link individuals and command lines to specific events. For example, in some of our audio recordings, coordinates of targets are read out loud, which make it indisputable what the intended target was. But no matter how compelling the data is, the requirements related to the handling and storage of the evidence still stands. So just to give a small example related to audio preservation, one of the best practices is to use cryptography to demonstrate the audio data's authenticity. So cryptographic tools such as hash values can be used to show that the data is unchanged from when it was collected and improving its probative value. So this is the point that we'll hand it over to Victoria.
Yeah, thank you, Johanna. So Johanna explained you how we started to work in the accountability sector, and now we will deep dive into 2 case studies so that you can understand what was the real impact of this work on the field. So yeah, so we will talk about a case related to double tap attacks on white helmets responders. So the white helmets have been Hala's historical partner in Syria since 2016, as Johanna explained you. So they are a major protection organization, but they also have an investigation unit in charge of leading their advocacy efforts. And so you need to know that during the conflict, more than 200 white helmets were killed and hundreds were injured. So in 2025, their investigation unit decided to conduct an investigation about double tap attacks. So in this context, double tap attacks should be understood as a first strike that usually targets civilian objects and persons. So for example, people in a school or an hospital. It is followed by a short waiting period of time. And then there is a second strike specifically targeting responders, medical workers, and even civilians who try to rescue the victim of the first strikes. So for this investigation, the team identified 122 potential double tap attacks that occurred during between 2014 and 2025. And then they narrowed the scope to 12 incidents that were documented through detailed case studies. So they reached out to Hala asking for data that could corroborate the findings of their investigation. And we were able to integrate several data sources that you can see on the slide here. So for example, we provided pilot radio intercepts that were already presented by Johanna, which were conversation between Russian-speaking pilots, and that reveals the authorization and confirmation of the strikes. So this kind of information helps us to reinforce the attribution of attacks. We also provide flight observations. So this type of data is part of our sentry system. And at this time, we worked with observers on the ground that covertly observed and reported the type, location, and direction of overhead aircrafts. And they reported this on a secure mobile application provided by Hala. So this was very useful to provide time-stamped evidence that confirms the sequence of the first and the second strike. Additionally, we looked at satellite imagery to confirm the presence of aircraft reported to have been involved in the attacks. And last but not least, we also provided incident reports. So this data is also part of our sensory system. At this time, we worked with local researchers that were in charge of carrying out daily investigations about airstrikes, and they drafted this report using mainly open source data, so social media, but also like information they got from the field, from local organizations. And this provided contextual information about attacks. Yeah, thanks you. So what was the impact of this work? By contributing structured data on multiple incidents, Hala helped investigators to demonstrate that these incidents were not isolated, but part of a repeated strategy. And the White Helmet also published this very comprehensive investigative report, which is an amazing advocacy piece of work because it raises public and institutional awareness of attacks against civilians and responders. Sorry. Additionally, this information can be used as evidence by non-judicial accountability bodies, which have an investigation mandate and can then pass on this information to, for example, law enforcement agencies or prosecutorial authorities. And by the way, we know that this report was submitted to European war crime units supporting cases pursued under universal jurisdiction. So this story actually shows how data provided by Hala can empower partners to seek accountability. However, impact doesn't come from the data itself, and it really comes from what partners are able to do with it. Yeah. So now I like to talk about another case study related to our partnership with Save Ukraine. So, yeah, as many of you know, thousands of Ukrainian children have been unlawfully deported to Russia and occupied territory in Ukraine since the full-scale invasion of the country by Russia in 2022. And many of these children have been separated from their family, moved through camp and other facilities, and they were placed at risk of identity erasure, forced adoption, and even indoctrination. So Save Ukraine, our partner, is an Ukrainian NGO leading rescue operation for children forcibly deported. And they also support their recovery, family reunification, and their reintegration into their communities. So far they have rescued more than 1,300 children. And so in 2025, we implemented a joint project with them, supporting a double purpose. So first, improving children's safety, and then also strengthening accountability for crimes in the future. And under the child protection component, so we achieved significant outcomes. First, we helped Save Ukraine to improve their data management system. We helped them to create a structured database that contain comprehensive information about missing children. In total, more than 700 profiles were consolidated into the database by the end of the project. We also help their team to identify facilities where forcibly deported children were located, using a multi-source analysis combining mobility pattern, satellite imagery, and open source data. And more than 400 facilities, including schools, summer camp, but also resort and orphanages, were mapped at the end of the project. And you can see on the satellite photo that we actually applied change detection capabilities, and this allowed us to discover that the Russian started to dig trenches in 2022. So you can see that this kind of information is very helpful for us, and actually it supported our assessment that this site may have been used for military style training for children. And last, so Save Ukraine, during the project, they rescued more than 200 children, and they provide them with a comprehensive assistance when they arrived in their recovery centers with their family. And this assistance included temporary housing, medical checkup, psychological and educational support. So it was a really like a comprehensive package. So this effort contributes altogether to turn complex data into actionable leads that strengthen Save Ukraine's ability to locate missing children and to support their rescue operation. Thanks. And so under the accountability component, Hala and Save Ukraine drafted a collection methodology guide to help Save Ukraine documenting crime against children. And this guide is similar to the Hala protocol because so it translates legal requirements into practical guidance. And this one focused on guidance for interviewing and recording children with a focus on child protection, consent, and also data sensitivity. So after that, Save Ukraine and Hala were able to review hundreds of interviews conducted by Save Ukraine team with children and their caregivers, and they include 175 of them in 3 legal dossiers that address forced transfers, deportation, and indoctrination of children in Russia and occupied territories. And these dossiers were submitted to accountability mechanisms. And last, in May 2025, so Ashley Jordana, who is our accountability lead, gave an interview to the Globe and Mail, which is one of Canada's leading national newspaper. And it was a very successful initiative, actually, because it brought our technical investigative work carried out by Save Ukraine and Hala to public attention. And it also this article also attracted the attention of other medias, and in a few weeks, 7 articles from major media outlets reference the collaboration between Hala and Save Ukraine. So altogether, this article really contributed to raise awareness of crime against children. And before jumping to the conclusion, I just want to read a testimony extracted from Save Ukraine and War Child Children report, a testimony from a child, which illustrates the pattern of indoctrination affecting children. So every Monday, we raise the Russian flag. Teacher repeated us the same line. Ukraine started the war. Russia is protecting us. Soldier came to the college and made us prepare voluntary compulsory aid package for the Russian army. So this is from like a boy of 18 years old in Luhansk. So this effort altogether improved the quality and the usability of evidence, and above all, it helped to preserve information about crime against children that can be used in future accountability processes. And you can go, to the next slide for the conclusion. So to conclude, the main message we want to leave you with is that crisis data can serve more than one purpose when it is handled safely and responsibly. In an immediate term, data can support protection. For example, in Syria, the Sentry system provided up to 8-minute warning before incoming airstrikes, giving civilians and first responders a critical window to take protective action. Over time, operational data can also help to preserve truth. And you saw in the White Helmets investigation example that historical data help to corroborate a sequence and context of the attacks. So this contributed to advocacy and legal submissions. And across all of this, partnerships are what turn data into impact. And whether it is through support, it was through supporting the White Helmet or Save Ukraine, Hala's role here is an enabler, which help partners to transform data into action, into protection and accountability. So looking ahead, one important opportunity for us is to continue building a responsible partnership with organizations that bring strong protection expertise. And this includes our emerging partnership with Civic, which is a respected organization in the civilian protection field, and which represents a promising step towards connecting crisis data, safer action for civilians, and future accountability. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Victoria and Johanna. I think that's it's really interesting. So I don't know if there is any question from the audience for Johanna and Victoria.
We can't have been that comprehensive that everything is clear.
On my side, I just have a question. So from what I understand, I mean, in terms of data sources, you're working with a lot of audio data, and I mean, like, for example, also the flight observation data and everything. And so you're working with local organizations that are, I guess, providing those data. Is it how I understand it? And then, so I have two questions. So if it's really the case, I mean, how do you create a bit, I mean, how do you get this data? And then also, how are you also building new long-term relationships with those organizations in the field?
Yeah, in terms of getting the data, it really depends on the data source. So I wouldn't be able to give like an all-encompassing answer to that. We actually have Dan Henneberry, who is our director of analytics, on the call, if you wanted to comment on the kind of data pipelines when it comes to and Victoria seems to.
Yeah. I think Dan will give you more technical details, but overall, like, what is our strength is we always combine and corroborate multiple data sources. So like we procure some data. So for example, like mobility data or satellite imagery, but we also leverage information collected on the field by our partners. So Johanna gave the example of the observers, or even I mentioned the researchers that drafted the incident reports. And then we also like generate data based on this system. Oh, well, sorry, I believe I lost the connection. So then, some data feed into, for example, the early warning system, and then we were able to reuse this data for accountability purpose, and we also access open source data, for example, like social media data. But yeah, Dan is here, so maybe you can give more details if you want.
You said it well, Victoria. I would, I think maybe to answer a couple of the other points that you asked, Alison, the flight observation data specifically was very specific to Syria. And so we had a network of observers, we had reporting applications they were able to use. And then through like a combination of both the like visual, like actually looking at the aircraft and listening to those unencrypted military communications, they were able to piece together where the aircraft were kind of like in a really like coarse way. Like I don't mean coarse in like a bad way, but like it's not like a radar track where you can see like the specific flight path. In other cases, you know, that's obviously very hard to set up. And so, you know, while we have that capability, and in fact, there are certain parts of the world where we think a solution like Sentry is exactly the right thing, and we kind of have long-term ambitions to set up a Sentry-like system in these places again. Very often, we're looking more towards what I'm going to call like the global set of data. These are data sets where you can pretty reliably get this everywhere. And so we put a lot of time and money into building those capabilities. You've heard them, and I don't think it will be surprising to hear that satellite imagery is a big one. And so we've become quite good at working with satellite imagery. There's, of course, like a huge amount of latency there. So you're not going to be reporting civilians about an impending airstrike based on satellite imagery unless you get very, very, very lucky. There are kind of varieties of satellite imagery that will let us see, for example, like thermal anomalies, things that are hot, which can be one way to like infer, like, is a building occupied? Is, you know, are there vehicles idling? Things like this. There's synthetic aperture radar, which can see through the clouds, if you know how to look at it. So that plus the OSINT, which was mentioned before, which we have a large curated base for, ends up being maybe about 75% kind of the basis of information that we have. And from there, it's a lot of like specific partner data that we're able to incorporate. So at the risk of rambling, I'll kind of cut myself off there. That answers
Thank you. Is there any other question? If not, I think we can conclude here. So thank you all so much, Victoria and Johanna, for the presentation. It was really interesting. And yeah, we will look forward to see what are your next projects, and we will follow up closely also to see what you're doing. So that was a great introduction. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us. It was a real pleasure.
Yeah.
Valentina, I didn't see you. Hello.
Hi, Dan.
Thank you so much. So have a good afternoon, everyone, then.
Have a nice day. Bye-bye.
Have a nice day. See you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.